will lead.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, Tommy Duncan. Jimmy, we are here again. It is Wednesday evening, 8 o'clock p.m. Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. And if it's Wednesday evening, Jimmy, it is Black Men Speak.
That's right, the most progressive and informative talk show on the internet dealing with black issues. I mean, this is a place you come to get information and to find out what to do to deal with some of the problems that plague our people, Tom. And
Absolutely.
let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. Also, we have two special guests on tonight. Why don't you introduce our guests, Tom?
Yeah, we have two gentlemen that, folks, you are in for a show tonight. We are going to deal with an issue that I guess I don't know any other way to say it, Jimmy. I mean, our ancestors were dealing with this issue before we were dealing with it. And so we have two seasoned vets who are very deep and experienced into our topic for this evening. So we are very, very excited to, number one, start this show, and two, to introduce and talk to our guests about our topic for this evening, which is racial justice in the criminal justice system. So we have Mr. James Hawthorne with us tonight, has a long history in the law enforcement space. And then we have Mr. Russell Wilson, who has a very, very august cadre of experience in the criminal justice system as an attorney. Folks, before we get started with the show, we are going to have them to introduce themselves very briefly, tell us a little bit about their background. Then we're going to go into our topic of conversation. But before we get started, Jimmy, we want to talk to our audience about how they can join us, either call or chat in. So I'm going to let you tell them a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the live chat, if you want to text a question in, send them to us. We will. You could do it there or make a comment, and we will certainly try to address your question. But if you want to join the conversation, then you can dial the conference bridge, enter the PIN, make sure you put the pound sign at the end, and you can join right into the conversation. Also, if you ever have trouble finding our show on YouTube, I know sometimes it could be a challenge trying to search on the live page and find it. Go to our website, bmstalkshow.com, and in the upper right side of the web page, there's a button that says live. You can click on it and you'll be brought to the show live, so you don't have to go through YouTube to search. So anyway, if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. I want to thank you guys for the new subscribers we had. We've been gaining a few every week, so thank you guys for spreading the word and continue to share with others. Let them know that this is the place to come every Wednesday night. Come join the conversation. Get involved.
Absolutely, Jimmy, because we are not here to entertain. This is not a comedy show. This is
not
about information. Absolutely. Stop. This is not about information. This is about information and empowerment, not entertainment, Jimmy. So why don't we do this? We have a little bit less than an hour. Let's get into our topic.
Let's get
conversation, racial justice. We're going to have our two contributors and speakers for today to tell us a little bit about our background. Then we're going to kind of navigate the conversation with a few questions and then let it kind of go organically from there. First, we will start off with Mr. Russell Wilson. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Good evening, guys. Thanks for having me on the show. Name's Russell Wilson. I'm an attorney licensed to practice in the state of Texas. I'm going into my 26th year of practice. I'm board certified in criminal law. I formerly worked in the Dallas County District Attorney's Office with the first African American elected district attorney history of the state of Texas, Craig Watkins. We started there the Conviction Integrity Unit. We also started a Civil Rights Unit that was aimed at addressing law enforcement issues that were seemingly not being prosecuted. I was involved in several police shooting investigations, use of force investigation. We were also involved in the what I will call the body camera movement. I don't know if you'll remember initially law enforcement and a number of folks in law enforcement necessarily opposing some of the body cameras that we see today. And other than that, I'm a special prosecutor on a number of cases in the area and actively involved in criminal justice issues in the Dallas, North Texas area.
All right, thank you very much. And I'm gonna tell you guys before we get started, these two gentlemen are giants within our community.
Yes.
But do not let them undersell you. These brothers, both of them, are very powerful, and I am looking forward to a lot. And so, they what we call tread lightly, but walk with a very big stick. So I'm going to now let Brother James Hawthorne introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background and his experience as well.
Sure. Thank you, guys, for allowing me to have an opportunity to speak in this program. I think this is a topic that we can't talk about too much because there's just so much happening today. And, as we try to get around this topic, that it's important that we just continue these kind of conversations. But yeah, I've been in law enforcement since 1985, started with the Arlington Police Department and worked in just all sorts of areas at the Arlington Police Department, detective, school resource officer. I was a public information officer there for 15 years, hostage negotiator, hostage negotiation supervisor, promoted to up the ranks to assistant chief. And as assistant chief, I had victims advocacy and crime prevention, police academy, hiring, training, recruiting, all of those different areas. It kind of fell up under me at the police department there at Arlington. I retired there in 2013, went to work shortly thereafter at the Cedar Hill ISD Police Department, where I'm currently the police chief there for the school district, and that's an interesting role, being a police chief in the school district. It's a lot different than being in municipal policing, but it's very interesting and learn a lot, doing policing in that sector. Additionally, I'm the criminal justice chairman for the NAACP in Arlington, and was one of the founders of the African American Peace Officers Association there in Arlington, and just been involved in throughout my life. My background starting as a member of SNCC way back in the day, just been involved in a number of activist type organizations. That's really just been my whole career, and so very glad that you guys are taking on this subject, talking about this. This is a real important topic for our community, and so just glad to be a part of it.
Okay, thank you, sir. And before we get started, Tom, I want to say that Google Meet is only allowing us 2 video feeds at a time, so that's not us doing it. That's Google who's limiting this on their video conference. But we're not going to let that stop us. If I may, Tom, I want to throw out the first question, and that is to both our guests. Is Lady Justice blind when it comes to black folks?
Obviously, let me say this. As a police chief, I would be disingenuous without acknowledging the fact that in terms of policing, police historically have a very poor reputation of policing minority communities. That's a given. We don't even have to debate that. And so I think any conversation that we have to start it with that type of recognition. There have been many efforts along the way to make reforms. There have been some good efforts and some not good efforts, and obviously we still got a long way to go because we're still sitting here talking about this same conversation and having these same conversations right now. So the needle hasn't moved as much as some people would like to say that it has, and we have a long way to go. So, is when you say is Lady Justice blind? I mean, in theory, in theory, but the reality of that situation is we know that's just not true, and we know that's not true because of the statistics and incarceration rates that we see with people of color in prisons, and then the whole way that the system deals with people as they go through the system, through the district attorney's offices, the need to have a unit, as Mr. Wilson talked about, just because of those issues. We as police have historically done a piss poor job when it comes to really managing the issues that are important to Black people in those communities, and we just have not seen enough people champion that effort. A lot of good work has been done, and we've certainly come a long way. But in my opinion, we just still have so much longer to go, and we could spend 2 hours just talking about that, right?
Yeah, no, I would, echo the Chief's comments there. I would, I think the question really is probably more, why isn't Lady Justice blind?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a broad answer to that. I think we get into education, we get into income, we get into poverty, we get into not only cycles of violence, but recidivism. We get into absentee father issues. So I don't think it's as simple as the color of our skin, but the unifying factor to the police, the folks that are prosecuted more often for less serious offenses that make up the majority of inmates in the Texas prisons and nationally in the prisons, and that are prosecuted disproportionately to their percentage of the population as African American people. So I think it's a complex issue, certainly not one we can all nail down this evening. But at its core, Lady Justice isn't blind. And maybe even more importantly, she's not broke either. Because money matters. And we certainly learned that, right, with OJ or other high-profile African-American individuals that were able to afford robust defenses in their criminal cases. I don't think it necessarily does me any good to name off the people, particularly when they were acquitted of the charges. But economics plays a role in this as well. And, I think we got to include that because that's just true. So no, Lady Justice isn't blind. The reasons why is the reason why you have a show like this. The criminal justice system is going to impact each Black man on this call, on this line. Not only us, it's going to impact our brothers, our cousins, our friends, families, pastors, colleagues. You cannot go through 100 Black men and not find a person who's had a negative contact with the criminal justice system. And so,
well, and I'll piggyback on that. Each one of us here, right? I'm a police chief, you're an attorney, and our two distinguished brothers who are with us, we all have a story that we each could tell about a negative encounter that we've had with the police, And I tell people, when I'm in uniform, I'm viewed one way. And when I'm out of uniform, I'm viewed a different way, and that's just the reality, And so to be a police chief and not have that recognition, that's a problem if you don't recognize that.
Let me ask you this, and I appreciate your feedback on both of those. And we look at the issues historically speaking when it comes to what we now call law enforcement in America. Whether we're talking about police departments around the country, we look at sheriff's departments around the country, and those of us who've done our research understand that the genesis when you talk about law enforcement in America. It goes back to when our ancestors were enslaved. And of course, you had groups of folks that were formed in the, for lack of a better term, militias, and they were used to catch slaves and take them back to their so-called rightful owners when there was slavery in this country. And, part of that infrastructure evolved into what we know as traditional law enforcement in America, even though it did serve other purposes. But the question is this, as this country has evolved, as we look at the Emancipation Proclamation and the so-called freedom of Africans in this country, we look at everything from the, I guess, almost 80 plus some odd years to the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act. That whole culture of law enforcement for at least our community hasn't really changed that much, seemingly. And I believe you're right. And I'm pretty sure practically every other person who looks like us, black and male, can talk about an incident. Why does this have to happen? The question is, why is it, from your perspective, that our community seems to have so little power not enough power to make a difference in terms of how law enforcement deals with our communities? I mean, is it a political conversation? Is it a social conversation? Is it an economic conversation? What is it that's going on? What is it that's been going on?
Well, I think, Tommy, it's all of those, honestly. Everything that you just mentioned, it's all of those. Let me see. I think the best way that I can probably try to address some of this is that with the recognition that law enforcement, we don't necessarily write the laws, right? We just do law enforcement. And so, but that carries me back to I thought, police have been used and certainly, as you were talking about, as with the slave patrols. You even look at history and talk about Nazi Germany and who were the first people who started to enforce those policies, those things that against humanity. Initially, it was the police. And we bring in some of the police academies around the country. That's why part of that training is being spent at taking police academies to like the Holocaust Museum and show them how law enforcement was used to oppress. You look here in the United States during the Civil Rights era, right? 1950s, 1960s, and how law enforcement was used there. They were enforcing the laws, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a bigger issue. It's a societal issue, right? And police departments are microcosms of society. And so, to me, it's a broader issue. It's a societal issue, and certain laws that exist are unevenly applied and unevenly enforced. We know that, but some laws are on the books, in my opinion, that would be. I'm trying not to go here, but maybe I should just.
This is a safe part.
But some of the laws have been written to keep us in check.
Yes.
And so you have to have that recognition, and so in order to effect real change, like you were talking about, Tommy, I think there's a lot of ways to do that, but we have to have people sitting at the table that look like us, who not just look like us, but hold our values. Because a lot of people that look like us that sit at the table, right, and they don't necessarily hold our values and our views. And so we need people who look like us and represent our values and views that are at the table so that we can have an opportunity to. That's where change, is made. And so until that changes, until we I think get more involved in the political process and actually have district attorneys that look like us, people in the courtrooms that look like us. That's where, some of that, where we have an impact and some change can be made.
Okay.
What do you say, Russ?
Yeah, if I was to choose one issue that defines the lack of the progress that I think we wanted to make, because I do think we've made progress. And if you grew up, even when Chief became became a police officer back then, I don't know that I recall any black police chiefs in North Texas, period.
Right.
This was before there was a school district policing, all it. So some of the changes have come about, but they've come about at a lot slower pace. And if you're going to choose one issue for me, it's black voter participation.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does stem from that.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could take a thing like marijuana arrests. You could take a thing like traffic stops. And you could say, well, why does that still happen? And what the chief is saying is, hey, look, if that's the law and my title is law enforcement, why am I getting in trouble for enforcing the law? And we're saying, well, you're enforcing it differently. But certainly when we saw the first African-American president in the history of the United States elected, black voter turnout was at its highest.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't continue to rise. And then you had the 2016 election. But those elections just talk about the national issues. When you start talking about your local government here, I can certainly say, Dallas County flipped from Republican to Democrat. But the diversity of judges that took the bench in Dallas County was historic. In fact, became a model. But I think voter turnout and our long view vision, where we can show up to protest, we can show up to decry the wrongs, we can put the videos on YouTube, we can tweet it out. But when it comes down to getting to the polls, even if you look at what I would call, the new civil rights movement after the George Floyd issues, we struggled there. Even today, as Texas is calling its third legislative session, you're not going to see substantial laws that were put in place. You're going to see, moving by an inch as opposed to a mile. And, I point to voter turnout because I think we undervote and overexpect.
Yeah, Tommy, and then when we just look at everything that's going on, I mean, like Brother Wilson said, just at a state level, right? We don't have near the representation that we need at a state level in order for laws to be crafted or policies to be set that really impact us, right? Everything that we see right now is so frustrating and maddening, right? As Black people watching television and seeing all of these things happening at a state level that are going to matriculate down to us. And so that's why at times, we feel like we're not making any progress at all. We're going backwards because we see voter restriction laws being put in place, right? We see this redistricting that's taking place that's making it even more difficult for people who look like us to even be in places of like this to have an impact. And then, the whole voter apathy thing, that we're constantly having to battle because people don't feel like, that going to the polls makes a difference. And so there are a lot of different things that we have to fight. But, when you, I know you were going to talk about media, but when you look at the television every day there's a story talking about restricting voting. Every day there's a story that talks about something that's an oppressive act or what we don't see happening in the court system because there's a lack of representation in the courts. And we have some opportunities. I know there are lots of people of color that are running for judges in Tarrant County, and we have them in Dallas County too. But I just can't. There's nothing more important than getting involved in this political process, making your voice heard, and going to the poll and voting and putting people in place that are going to represent your views.
I
And as
agree.
long as we are not doing that, we can expect the same types of things because the people who are there don't represent our interest.
Well, I'm gonna ask Brother Wilson about that. Your former boss, District Attorney Watkins, I thought he was on the right track for some of the things that you and him and other people that were on his team were doing with DNA testing and doing the absolute best to right wrongs from previous convictions. My
Right.
question is, one, I was terribly disappointed when he didn't get reelected down there. I don't know what happened there, but it seemed to me that there is not enough of us who wants to get in a position of power and authority to take those kind of bold initiatives. It seemed like a lot of our people get into power and we just want to play along at that point, get with the program, rather than acknowledging that the program can be wrong. That maybe we do have to go back and look at prior cases. Maybe some of those cases were wrong. There were some wrongful convictions in there that we need to right. And there's nothing worse when the system wrongfully convicts a person and you take away their freedom. So I think that needs to be placed at a higher priority. And when we get in positions of authority, we need to be conscious of those things and use that power to address some of these wrongs, not just play along with the system at that point. I'm gonna give you the first shot, Brother Wilson, since
Y-
you were at the
Yeah.
front of
No,
that fight and leading the charge.
yeah, absolutely. The thing is this: as much support as, for example, Craig received, he got a lot of
He
criticism.
did.
People did not like that. Democracy and complacency can be very next door neighbors a lot of times, and so it's not, and so it's. I think what you're saying is correct, but most of your or some of your politically elected officials aren't willing to go out and risk that because sometimes the person's worried about reelection. Sometimes it's just not going to be a popular move. You could even look at the pushback that John Crusoe received. He says, "Hey, we're not going to prosecute first-time marijuana offenders." Some people are, ready to run him out of there. And so it's a political battle. You've got to sum the will of the people. Criminal justice reform should never be confused with black folks wanting the ability to commit crimes. Those are two totally different things, but it gets sold that way. Give you the example. I don't know if remember the Willie Horton story.
Yes.
Yes.
Way back then. And so reform can be seen as being soft. The whole back the blue movement, when you're or blue lives matter. So when your one view of trying to improve things, criminal justice reform could be viewed as being soft on crime, or criminal justice reform could be viewed as being anti-police. And it's neither of those, but because of politics, right? You don't necessarily have to be honest in politics. It's not a place where you've got to tell the truth. And you're going to try to get the person that's going to be, maybe more aligned with your views. And you go back to that voter turnout issue, you still have underrepresentation, and then you have disqualification, whether through felony convictions or whatnot. And so our work is cut out for us. But I do believe we need more ambitious leaders. We need
We do.
more people that are willing to take risk. and that's a constant struggle, even within whether you're Democrat or Republican. Politicians consistently disappoint me. Let me put it that way.
I agree. I understand.
So, but I do think we're better off than where we were.
Yes, we have made progress. TD.
So, man, I've been writing down a lot of stuff. This is a lot of good content, and I'm expecting that our viewers and our listening audience out there is doing the same. We do want to remind them, if you'd like to call in, Jimmy, I believe you said there's a call-in number
Yes.
on the screen. So for those of us who are listening out there, if you'd like to call in and ask questions, do so. We are about halfway through already for this show, and we're going to dig in to try to see if we can get to some constructive responses in terms of not just where we are, but what can we do moving forward. So there are a couple of things that I'd like to put out there. Obviously, there are a lot of dynamics that we go in here. We're talking about not just the legislators, the politicians who draft the law. You have the people who influence them, whether they are folks in our community or, quite frankly, the business community. You look at the law enforcement community, which is kind of an arm that you mentioned that's an enforcement of the laws that are on the books. So my question comes to this. It's a bit complicated because you speak to the under excitement of voter turnout, and especially in between the presidential election years. And, in a lot of cases, things happen in those off presidential voting years that are very critical to our community that pertains to policy. So when it comes to what our communities can do that can affect change as it pertains to policy so that the criminal justice system is more unbiased. Is that a conversation that we should be having, or is the conversation is what is it that we need to do to put ourselves into a more stricter sense of power? Because clearly divide and conquer has always been the strategy when it comes to our community, in particular the Black community, the only community I'm really concerned with right now, because we probably are victimized more so than any other community. What is it that we need to do? What conversations do we need to have? More importantly, what action do we need to take as a community that is not in the majority in most places in order to get our interests met when it comes to criminal justice and law enforcement?
Yeah, I'll just speak briefly to that. You and I were talking the other day, Tommy, and I'll say this as far as police departments go. We have to have a seat at the table where decisions are being made. And what I mean by that, oftentimes as a police chief will want to do the right thing. Police chiefs are met with resistance, and you have seen a number of police chiefs around the country who have gone in and tried to affect change and try to be progressive, and they get a large amount of pushback from the status quo, if you will. And when I say that, I mean police unions. You have what's called Chapter 143 civil service. Those types of structures that are in place that make it impossible a lot of times for a police chief to discipline a police officer, fire a police officer, and that kind of thing stick. You have unions that are pushing back, and they are really defending the cops, which is what their guys pay their dues, into those systems for. But in my opinion, they do it to a point where it's not productive to a good relationship with the public, because they protect them at all costs, even when they're wrong, and they shouldn't do that. Correct. And so when they're protecting them at all costs, even when they're wrong, I mean, that doesn't give the public much belief that we're trying to do the right thing, because they see the police protecting the police. And as long as they see that happening, that just, is not going to give them a high degree of confidence. So there are opportunities, though, to be involved in police departments. And I mentioned, police departments often have what they call training advisory councils. These are citizens that sit on the police department training advisory committees that review training, review policies, review all sorts of things. As this is not a citizen review panel or a citizen review board. Those are two different types of things, but this is a panel of citizens that are sitting there reviewing training and the training policies, and those policies ultimately end up being in effect to officers out there on the street. And so I think if we can come in and have a seat at the table in those types of instances, and when I say we, I mean people who are activists, people who have strong opinions and biases and whatnot about the police department, because the police department needs to connect with those people. We need to connect with those individuals so that we understand what the real issues are. Because as long as we keep inviting the people who are what I would say the citizens on patrol people, the community watch people, we know what those people are going to think and what they're going to say. They're going to be big supporters of the police and big back the blue, supporters. But we need to connect with the other people that don't like us so much. Why don't they like us so much? We need to bring them into the mix. We need to hear their views and have them sit at the table, and we have real frank dialogue, real discussion where we give voice to their concerns and voice in terms of implementing those concerns that they have, where they can see that translate into some policies that we have. And I think once people feel like that they're at the table and that they're being heard, I think then the community gets a sense that there is some progress being made. And so that's just a thought that I had. You and I talked about that the other day just a little bit, and so I just wanted to make sure that I inserted that into the conversation too.
And I appreciate that. So you mentioned having a seat at the table, and there are some groups that have some influence on a policy when it comes to law enforcement, and that may be a new piece of information. I mean, I've heard it before, but I wasn't very familiar with it. And I guess part of it is understanding how law enforcement works, because with any public entity, I presume that there are guidelines as to how the police department is supposed to work, how the sheriff's department is supposed to work, that I would presume is public information. Because I think, for instance, when you get stopped, me, your mother, your brother, your child, God forbid, they need to understand the law. At least, I mean, not a 1,000-page book, but they need to understand the law. They need to understand their rights, but they also need to understand the policies that drive that law enforcement agency. How is that a fact? If so, how do we inform and empower ourselves so that we are not totally ill-prepared and uninformed when situations arise and we don't understand the power that we actually have? Because I believe part of this comes from the fact is we don't understand that we actually have some rights and some power. We just don't know where to find it.
Yeah. I mean, and we used to, when I was at Arlington PD, we try to invite the community out. And when I say the community, we were looking for people that look like us to come and participate in what we would call citizen police academies. So we educate them a little bit on how police departments operate. But that's just a start, right? We got to get them at the table so that we can push them into other areas of influence within the organization. But we have such a hard time. I fill up those citizen police academies and we'd have 50 people in there and maybe 5 or 6 people of color, because people that look like us just did not want to come and participate and attend. And so when those opportunities are available in your community, please take advantage of those kinds of opportunities, because that's just your foot into the door. And it should open the door to other opportunities that would exist. Like I said, maybe a training advisory panel, a panel that exists to look specifically at internal affairs, traffic policies, and how police departments conduct traffic operations. There are all sorts of opportunities for citizens to have input. And a lot of times, citizens don't take advantage of those opportunities. And a lot of times police departments handpick individuals that, the not so controversial ones, to sit at the table, and that's a little disingenuous, too. So we got to insist that we are at the table and try to pull in those people who we're uncomfortable with, having uncomfortable conversations so that we can make some type of change.
Is there a document, a set of standard operating procedures that the public can get access to online or any other way so that they can read and understand how this is supposed to work, standard operating or whatever the appropriate term is?
Yeah, most police departments will have their policies online, and if they don't, it's public information. So you can request a copy of the
and sheriff's offices too, correct? Or is it something different with sheriff's offices?
No, it's not, with any law enforcement agency. And if you have a law enforcement, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Tom, I believe that if you don't know who to reach out to, the city secretary for your city is who you can send a request to. And I'm pretty sure between them and the city attorney's office, they will find a way to get your request processed.
And what is it they're asking for, Jimmy?
Just whatever information like you were just asking. If you want to know the training manual for the
there we go.
Then put in an information request for that. And like I said, maybe you don't know who the public information officer is at your police department. So and when all this fails, send it to the city secretary. They'll find a way to get it routed.
And Brother Wilson, I know you have been very patient, and as we've been, I want to get your perspective on this as well.
Right. So, I would agree with that. We need to have a seat at the table, but I would say this. The people that show up that are going to go currently, the people that show up that are going to go to the police academy and things like that, they're usually in a little bit of a different position than the average African-American man. And, economically, what people do is you get up. A lot of folks are, don't necessarily have a lot of savings. They don't necessarily have a lot of extra time. They may have children to take care of, grandparents in their family, and their own personal issues to deal with. And so what happens is you may want to participate in those things, but the time to be able to do that is directly related to your economic position. If you're lower in income and lower in education, it's unlikely you're going to even have the time if you wanted to. And so we got to recognize, hey, not everybody can necessarily make it there to those tables. But I don't necessarily think that means that they don't want to, but we can't fault them if they're putting their other things, in front of them. And that's just the natural result of their situations.
True.
The other thing is, when we talk about it being a black man issue or something along those lines, one of the things that stood out to me with the protest over the last couple of years was the diversity that you saw in the groups of protesters. Even, for example, in Austin, was a white person getting shot and killed in a Black Lives Matters protest by another white person. And those things are significant for this. My personal view is the black community can't do it on their own. We can't bring about the change. You've got to have buy-in from the other members of your community that this is a community issue, not just a black men issue. And I say that just because the numbers say that we don't turn out enough people to vote. We're not going to, as black men as a group, win an election without votes that come from some other group outside of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so either you got to turn out every black man, or you got to include other groups. And that's part of, to me, part of the issue, which can be the wall or obstacle, because sometimes those groups we're going to have opposing views.
Right.
And so we got to figure out that formula. But relying on the smaller group with the least amount of voter turnout to affect the largest amount of change, if we were doing a math problem, we wouldn't say that's not likely to be the most successful formula. But that's what I think happens time and time again.
So,
So I
go
think it's
ahead.
got to expand.
So,
And I agree with everything that you just said, Brother Wilson, because that is very true. People are busy. They got families. They got all sorts of stuff that they're trying to do.
You got to live first. You
got to live first.
Living can be hard.
Yes, it can. I don't disagree with any of that at all. But but I think when we say that, to me, we give the police departments an out, because and I don't think we can afford to do that any longer. We have to find people who will take the time. We have to insist that the police departments, people in the community are not going to them. We have to insist that the police department come to the community. They have to meet and organize around the times that work for the community. And we're not necessarily on the police clock or the police timeline, and I think historically that's what police departments do. We put it out there, but we want people to accommodate us, when I'm saying it needs to be the other way around, so that we can get the people that you're talking about, the people who really need to be at the table, who can't be for whatever reason, not give police departments that out. We're going to come meet you. We're going to have the people that the community wants at the table, and we're going to do it at a time and a place that's conducive for us to make that happen. Even if it's not convenient for us, it's convenient for the community. And that's what I think that we got to do.
So let me take a different approach here, and I want you gentlemen to respond. I don't have a great deal of trust in the system, and I know Brother Wilson pointed out how things are changing, some progress is making, and I agree wholeheartedly that we're going to partner with other groups to get things done, because we just don't have the power to do it ourselves. With that being said, I think that one of the best things we can do is stay out of the system. This is a system that, like Brother Wilson said, Lady Justice is not blind. She has 20/20 vision. She sees white folks come through the court system, and black people, and it seems like the justice is not, those scales are not always balanced on color line.
But Jimmy, let me, and I mean, definitely, here's the thing about the I don't trust the system. What's the alternative?
Stay out of the system.
And I agree with you 100%. But if you get caught in the system, if you get on the traffic stop, if you get stopped, and I only say what's the alternative to this, is because I think that some people will hear you say, I don't trust the system, and they'll translate that into, F it, don't participate at all. It'll always be this way. It'll never ever work for. So, and when I say what's the alternative, it's like, if you were pure radical, you could say, well, eradication of a police department altogether.
No, that's not the answer. Correct.
And I think for a lot of reasons, that's not the answer. There's not civilized societies that have worked without policing forces. Correct. Even if you went all the way back to Egypt. So it wouldn't, but distrust of the system can't translate into lack of participation.
No,
I certainly agree with you that distrust of it, I would say, yeah, if that'll keep you from getting involved, that's step one. Certainly don't, because you get involved, you get a felony, you get 1 in 4 black men having contact, then that diminishes your ability to participate. Correct. You can't have a law license if you're a felon. You can't be a police chief if you're a felon. Your criminal record itself is eliminating. So I absolutely agree with you there. But I just caution people that, the notion that we will restructure government in its entirety to a system that we now can trust, I think that's not going to happen in my lifetime.
I agree with you 100%.
We got to work with this one.
And Jimmy, I want to make sure we set some context. We're about almost 10 minutes until the top of the hour.
Okay.
And I know that Brother Hawthorne, he's going to have to jump off maybe a couple of minutes before the hour because he has another commitment as well at the top of the hour. So what we need to do probably, Brother Wilson may be able to stay with us a little bit longer, is kind of have some closing questions to this conversation. I don't believe this will be the last conversation, hopefully on this
not.
topic. But let's have a couple of closing questions that Brother Hawthorne and Brother Wilson can address. Brother Hawthorne may have to drop off for a couple minutes, and then Brother Wilson may be able to stay with us. But we want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time as we're closing out the hour, Jimmy. So, and if I not wrapping it up, but a couple of things I have, in terms of leverage, because there are a couple of things I heard. Having a seat at the table, which is very important, which is where policy is being made. And unfortunately, a lot of cases, we're kind of like that one or two people in a large room full of other people that have other interests. The other thing, obviously, is having alliances with other groups, because obviously we're somewhere between 12 to 14% of the collective population in the United States. But depending on your geography, you're obviously a part of a small group in some cases, others maybe not. And then obviously information is power. So understanding what rights and what power you have. And so those are obviously some things that are very important. But when we talk about not being the majority, now, by the way, the United States is becoming a majority minority within the very near future, even though we may not be the largest minority. Clearly, the question is,
right, exactly.
If we go back to my old math class and we look for that leverage, that ball, and whatever that is that we put on top of that ball, so that we can lift something with a small population, or let's say a small collective, what leverage must we begin to focus on in terms of the political situation, in terms of the economic situation, in terms of the criminal justice, in terms of the law enforcement within our communities, so that we can affect change with not being the largest, most politically, most economically powerful group competing right now for resources and justice at this point?
Man, you said a lot. That's
I
a whole
know.
lot.
Tom gives you long questions. He's known for that.
And you're right. I have to go in just a couple of minutes, but I just go back to our involvement in the process. And when I say our involvement in the process, we most definitely have to have police officers that look like us policing our communities. We have to have police officers that look like us as supervisors, that are guiding decision making that's being made. And when I say that, I want to put it into this context. As a police officer, I was only responsible for myself and my decisions. As a sergeant, when I became a sergeant, I was responsible for 6 to 10 officers that worked under me. So I had direct influence on what they did. I could hold them accountable. When I went up, I was a lieutenant. So now I have a whole, what we call a police sector. I have 40, 50, maybe 60, up to 60 officers that are working for me. So now I have influence over what they do. I can hold them accountable when they don't do the things that they're supposed to do. And as I go higher and higher, that sphere of influence that I have becomes greater. And so when I say we have to be inside the system, we have to be officers, we have to be supervisors, we have to promote up the system so that we can affect change where it needs to take place in these agencies. And that don't always happen, but it's certainly not going to happen if we are not part of that process.
Let me ask you this, and this is very short. Police chiefs are appointed, sheriffs are elected. What is it that we can do to influence power with them?
With police chiefs?
Because obviously they have a responsibility for the entire force in their community, right?
Yeah. And I'll go back and let me use Arlington for example. As a member of the NAACP, the city manager who was involved in that selection process, who ultimately selected the police chief, reached out to various organizations, the NAACP being one. And we were able to have conversation to kind of shape the selection process. that in a way that we thought the selection process should be run as an African American community. And I'm sure he reached out to various other constituents and got their input as well. But we felt like, anyway, that we had a seat at the table. We had his ear, and we were able to influence some decision making that ultimately resulted in the selection of an African American police chief for the city of Arlington. And that's because we had the ear of the person who was directly making the decision. I think the city manager would have made the decision. First, but let me say this: the city manager made the decision he wanted to make anyway, regardless of what we said. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that we had the ability to have some influence, or at least get him to hear our concerns and trying to be responsive to the community. We were able to affect change in a positive way that we believe resulted in the selection of a police chief that really had our best interests at heart and had all the other communities' interests at heart. So you have to have the ear of the people who are making the decisions, and not just have their ear, but can actually see that your influence, your conversation is influencing the conversation at a higher level, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
absolutely. And if we kind of steer that question to you, Brother Wilson, but with a little bit of a different slant, since obviously you deal with the courts and the judges and that kind of thing. I'm sorry, Brother Hawthorne.
And I'm sorry, I got to get off because I have.
Thank you, Brother Hawthorne, for coming, man. Please come.
And you will, and I'm telling you right now, you will be back on this show.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hope to see you.
Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Brother Wilson, you have obviously a different angle on this because you deal with a different set of stakeholders. Leverage.
Right. Certainly all the judges are elected, but I would point out even an appointed chief, ultimately the person doing the appointment answers to someone who is elected.
Right.
So it's just based, for the basis of democracy. So, and when I'm encouraging voters to vote, it's to hold that elected person accountable, even if that person isn't the actual decision maker. You see that certainly on the national level when you see a person appointed, for example, as Secretary of State or confirmed in any position, but there is, in essence, political appointees. So if we're voting, we're getting people appointed or elected that are going to influence who gets appointed. On our district court benches, the people, the judicial elections, you can't underestimate the importance of these things, because these are the elections that I think we're most likely to have contact with, from your family court judges, your civil court judges, and your criminal court judges. If you're going to have a child support issue, you might be in family law court. If your child or somebody is going to be charged with a crime, they're going to be in a criminal court. Somebody runs into you or discriminates against you, you're going to be in a civil court. So those elections to me are vitally important to what happens in a particular community, because often those judges will reflect the values of the people that elected them. And that's kind of how Texas got that whole tough on crime and 99 years for a candy bar and things of that nature. So, well, yeah, no, it's funny, but it happened. Dallas County led the nation in wrongful.
Yeah, you get a couple of convictions, boy. That third one could be tough if it's 3 strikes and out. Hey, Brother Wilson, you said something interesting, and I want to make sure we do justice to the statement, because I think it's very important and viable. You said, and you pointed out correctly, that we don't have enough power to bring about change, and that we need to partner with others. Can you just expand on that some more so people fully understand what you mean by that, to make sure that we can accept it as a viable solution for some of the things we're going through?
If voting, in order to win an election, you've got to have the majority. And you can look at the numbers of people that vote. You can look at the numbers of black men that vote, and you could look at the group of black men and say, can this group in this community influence the outcome of the particular election? And so, in that sense, I'm saying some of this is a numbers game, where you could get, on a national level, all the black men in the country could not by themselves elect a president. There'd be too many people of other populations, other genders. And so if the goal is to win the election and your numbers aren't necessarily enough to be able to do it by yourself, then you've got to group up with other people. Certainly, you've got to increase your own voter turnout, which for years for African Americans, it went up, up, up. When it went down, that was 2016. 2016, Donald Trump was elected as president over Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton received a lot of backlash for a whole variety of reasons. But regardless of what you think of those people, that's what happened. And then what ensued for African Americans, what ensued for the country. And so when we don't vote, there's consequences. Trump, to me, was a one that we were able to see on a macro scale, but these things happen in your own communities on a smaller scale. It just doesn't necessarily make the news. So you don't know, or you don't have the time to engage. But I think we have to have.
We do have to get engaged.
People buying in.
Yes.
Just like we do, for example, with health conditions with African American men. If we say that we don't take care of ourselves correctly, or that when you can get more of that discussion going, but I don't know that it can just be black men that unilaterally can change an election. I haven't seen that.
No, that's probably just as a single group. That's probably not going to happen. Okay.
But I think we should, if you had 90% voter turnout among African American men, you would have policy changes.
You think so?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Unpack that. When you say we're not a large enough group in order to enforce our power, but if you say if we had 90%, is it 90% of African American men or 90% of African Americans that there would
90% of African American men?
Well, some of these elections, Tom, the turnout is so small. They came in numbers that we could influence the election at that point.
So let's simplify the peeling back of that onion as to what you mean, what the potential is there. If you talk about one small demographic, African-American men voting in force at 90% on targeting a specific issue, what's an example of that?
Let's say you were targeting a Dallas City Council position.
School board, yes. Or
you may have voter turnout for that position, less than 30,000 people. Voting in a May election, you may be elected to represent a community that's 500,000 people. And so the overall voter turnout is so low that if you got 90% of African American men voting in every election, you would certainly have an influence, because the people who make the policies listen to the people who vote. You listen to the protesters because it's, I think, the correct media thing to do. But you listen to the people who vote, I think, in a different way. And also the ones that make political contributions.
The money, yes.
Yeah, the money.
We have to get more involved in the money giving, too.
Right.
Jimmy, that's a different show that we need to put on our books.
But it's historically been one where we really don't do much. You don't see a lot of black large political donors, and you don't see a lot of even sometimes even on a small basis. But we've got to see those as avenues of change. And historically, black men, I think, under participate in the political process in that way as well. And
is it because of a lack of information? Is it because of something else?
It's a lot of things. You start out what you got to live every day first,
Right.
and I think most men and women in our community, you get up, you're going to work. The majority of folks aren't going to be in the position like I am, where you go to work for yourself, uh, and you're worried about your kids. Even if they're adults, you're still worried about them. You're worried about your bills and your car notes and things of that nature. And so the amount of free time that you have to give is kind of limited. And then that time, some of it you want to spend relaxing. You want to go have a bite to eat with your wife, or go out to have a drink, or watch the game with your boys. And so it's, where do we change such that political involvement becomes our routine?
Well, I
Well,
think
plus you got.
that again. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say, people want their voices heard. They don't want to waste their time. If they feel that I'm going to participate and contribute to the process, but the process is not paying attention to me because nothing changes, then people
Right.
eventually lose interest. I mean, they're just not going to,
Exactly.
keep coming. So we have to make sure that when we invite people, I mean, I heard some excellent solutions tonight, and I think those are all viable, getting people involved. But when you get them involved, make sure there's a mechanism to show some results for the involvement. So you encourage
Right.
them to come back. It could be something really small. I mean, but you say, hey, we talked about this at the last meeting, and we went off and we did this. Now we're coming back to report that we heard what you had to say. We can't change it all in one night. But I mean,
Exactly.
we can
Yeah.
tackle a small bite here and there, so people feel that they're being engaged, and now it's worthwhile. Now I'll come back to future meetings because I know something's going to be come out of it. But man, if nothing comes out of it, it's just the same old, same old. Life looks the same to me, no matter what direction I look, and no matter what I say and what you say. Then yeah, that apathy is going to kick in, and people are going to stop participating.
Yeah, and I mean, I think some of that was the thinking. For example, that went with body cameras for law enforcement, where we were, I think, of a mindset, if we can just get body cameras, even though you knew there were way, way bigger issues and way more issues.
Right.
But generally, I think 100% focusing on an achievable goal, figuring out a way that it can be funded. So not just saying that we want the law changed, but knowing the impact of what we want the law to change to look like, the cost, the budget for it, and then making it viable where all the stakeholders get some advantage of it.
Correct.
When you look at criminal justice reform, one of the things that made criminal justice reform a unitary issue, you would have your big government person saying, you're going to go to them and say, well, hey, we're going to shrink government, we're going to shrink cost. Then your civil rights person, you may say, we're going to reduce incarceration. Well, each person is buying into the idea for a different reason.
Right.
I don't want to spend money that's being wasted. Well, we're still wasting millions every day on locking up people that aren't a threat. Statistically, they're just not. But we can't get that agreement there because we don't have enough push on the buy-in.
So, Tom, we are top of the hour, past
Yes,
the
sir.
hour.
Absolutely.
So, you want to let's go ahead and wrap up and get our closing prayer and.
Absolutely. And Brother Wilson, I need you to understand that we're gonna have to have you back too, because I already got 2 or 3 topics in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
One is understanding the court system. You kind of started talking about some stuff that's a whole different show.
Right. No, absolutely. Looking forward to the discussion.
I was hoping we talk more about the court system tonight, so we're gonna have to bring you back to expand so we can have that more detailed conversation. So
Because if you're talking about something that has a huge impact on our daily lives that most folk know absolutely nothing about until they're in that courtroom, that's a conversation we got to have.
it. Right there.
and that's not the best way to learn about the court system.
That's too
No,
late.
sir.
That's too late.
No, sir.
When you're in front of that
That's too late.
judge,
So, Jimmy, when you start talking about staying out of the system, you
Man.
need to understand the system to figure out how to
Yes, you
stay out
do.
of.
Right. what the problems are.
You may
Yes,
be a little
sir.
Absolutely.
bit more motivated to stay out of it if you understand how it works and not work for you all the time. So,
All right. Well, let's close in prayer.
okay.
We will now bow our heads, dear Lord and gracious Father. We come before you this evening, thanking you for bringing us back together again as stakeholders in our communities. Father, we ask that you would keep our minds focused on what your greater will is for us individually, but more important, collectively, because we understand that you have gifted us all with certain skills, abilities, and passions, Father. So we ask that you would keep us focused on those. We thank you for bringing Brother Wilson and Brother Hawthorne to this show tonight.
Yes, we
We
do.
thank you for the impact that they are having on our daily lives as they are doing your work, Father, for your will. We ask that you would continue to protect them, that you would protect their families, that you would keep them inspired and motivated to do the great work that they are doing so that all of our communities may be better for it, Father. We just thank you for all of these things. And in your precious name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, guys.
And the show is off, right? We stopped streaming?